Hi everyone, this is Dr. GVR Seshagiri Rao, Professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. So today we will see the definition and terminology of engineering tribology subject. So already in previous sessions we have covered the syllabus, friction and lubrication and wear, corrosion and engineering materials properties. So sometimes in examinations they will ask short answer questions like definitions and terminology. So these are the very important for every subject, the basics, the basic understanding of the definition and terminology. So today we will see the definitions, how they will ask in examination, the questions and then answers we will discuss, and then similarly the terminology also. So here taken first unit, the surface interaction and friction topic. In this, the definition and terminology questions are, the first one is what is friction and then what are the causes of friction. So you should write one or two lines only to the friction. What is friction? You should give brief shortcut, and then causes of friction. You should write 3-4 lines only. So not more than that. So the friction is mainly defined as the resistance offered by the surfaces that are in contact when they move past each other. So whenever contacting the two surfaces, there is a friction due to the resistance offered by the surfaces. So this is the friction definition. So what are the causes of this friction? The friction is caused due to the irregularities on the two surfaces in contact. So whenever two surfaces are in a mating condition or to contact each other, they due to the irregularities in the surfaces. So the both surfaces are same, there is no irregularity and same property and the smoothness also there, then there is no question of friction. So that when one object moves over the other, these irregularities on the surface get entangled and giving rise to friction. So the more the roughness, more irregularities and more significant will be the friction. So like this, you should give answer for this question, what is friction and causes of friction. Similarly, the second one is mention any 3 applications of friction. So in the examination, in definition terminology, they will not ask any derivations, they will not ask any equations. So they will not ask solve this problem and that problem. So the only simply they will give answer. They will ask. So what is friction? What are the properties of friction? What are the causes and what are the applications of the friction? So what do you mean by wear? So like this they will ask. So I think this session will be useful for our reference. The friction finds application when matchsticks are ignited. That is one application. Best example. The motion of pistons in a cylinder is an application of friction, and as it is possible to write on books and board as there is a friction between the pen and the board. So pen and paper and then the marker on the blackboard. So due to this friction property, due to this contact between these two, so it is useful. It works to write the any matter on the blackboard, and similarly in pen also. So when writing a book, so the grip is required. So how does friction produce heat? Next question. When surfaces in contact move relative to each other, the friction between the two surfaces convert kinetic energy into heat. Whenever the two contact surfaces are in relative motion, there is a friction. So due to this friction, the kinetic energy into convert into heat. So that's why the friction produce heat. Next one, how is friction useful? The friction helps us in walking. For example, the friction between the shoes and the floor stops us from slipping. The friction between the car and the road prevents the car from sliding. So there is a friction between the road and car trail. So if there is no friction, so you can't move. So and you can't walk on the floor. So that's why the friction is required. The friction useful to uh, move on a car, move a car on road, and walking on a road. Why is friction a non-conservative force? The friction is a non-conservative force because the amount of work done by the friction depends on the path. So whatever the amount of work done occurred by the friction, that is depends upon the path. So that's why it is said to be non-conservative force. Let's define friction. Also give the SI unit of friction. The friction already we have studied in first question. Define friction. Another way. So this friction is the force that opposes the relative motion between the two surfaces of objects in contact. The force of friction always acts in the direction opposite to that of the applied force. Since friction is a type of force, it is measured in newtons. The units, SI unit of friction is Newton. Let's define lubricants and a drag force. The substances used to reduce friction between two surfaces in relative motion are called lubricants. Example, oil and grease. So in first and second slides, we have studied about friction. So friction required and friction definition and the causes of friction. So whenever two components are in relative motion, there is a friction. But how to reduce this friction? By using lubricants like oil and grease. Apply oil or grease in between the contacting surfaces. The somewhat the friction will be reduced. The frictional force exerted by fluid is known as drag. So what are the frictional force exerted by fluids is known as drag. Whenever you're using lubrication or oil, the frictional force exerted some force. These force is called as drag force. Give reasons why we sprinkle fine powder on a carom board. So you know when playing carom board, so you are using this sprinkle, this fine powder. So why? Because to reduce the friction. The simple answer is to reduce the friction between the board and the coins. So explain why sliding friction is less than static friction. So the friction again classified two types. One is sliding friction and static friction. Already we studied in theory part. So why sliding friction is less than the static friction? What is the reason? So explain given in this question, but don't write not more than 4 lines. Simply give explanation. When an object starts sliding, the contact points on its surface do not get enough time to lock in the contact points on the other objects. So that the sliding friction is less than the static friction. So whenever object starts sliding, the contact point and its surface so do not get enough time to lock in the contact points. In this sliding friction, that's why the sliding friction is less than the static friction, not occurred in the case of static friction. Give reasons why sprinkle powder and carom board. So already we have studied, repeated this question. And why are aeroplanes streamlined? Where do we find streamlined shapes in nature? The aeroplanes are streamlined so that air offers minimum friction. The bodies of birds and fishes are streamlined. Air offers the minimum friction. Due to this reason, the aeroplanes are streamlined. In nature, the streamlined shapes are bodies and birds. So, what is the causes of friction? So, many causes are there. You can write any two or three causes. So, the interlocking of irregularities in the two surfaces in contact, nature of surface that is smooth or rough, pressure of two surfaces that is how hard the two surfaces are pressed together, the mass of the body of surfaces in contact, shape of surface that is flat or curved. So these are the important causes of friction. So what are the factors affecting friction on an object in a fluid? The factors affecting friction on an object in a fluid are: one is speed of the object with respect to the fluid, the shape of the object, and the nature of the object. These three are affecting friction on object in a fluid. Next question. Give two ways of increasing and reducing friction. So how can you increase the friction and how can you reduce in the friction? Give two methods. So one is making a rough surface and increasing applied force. These are the increasing methods. Making a rough surface and then the force, so whatever force you are applying, so increase that force. Ways to reduce friction force: use of lubricants, use of ball bearings and rollers. So these are the reducing friction methods. So whenever you use lubricants, there is a less friction when compared to dry surfaces. Similarly, use of ball bearings and rollers. Just to give examples to show that friction is both a friend and a foe. The friction acts as a both friend and foe. Examples of friction as a friend, that is friction helps us to walk. Already we have discussed. Friction between the paper and the pen enables us to write. Nail is fixed in the wall due to the friction. So friction between the matchsticks and the side surface of it help us to write a matchsticks. So these are the examples. So that the friction is both friend. So name the three properties to describe the friction force. What are the three properties of frictional force? One is magnitude of a frictional force, and the direction of a frictional force and frictional forces. The magnitude of a frictional force on an object is proportional to the normal reaction force that the surface exerts on it. The proportionality constant is called the coefficient of friction. It only depends on the material of the surfaces in contact. the coefficient of friction. Next one, direction of frictional force is that opposes the relative motion or the tendency of relative motion between an object and the surface it is in contact with it. The frictional forces always acts parallel to the surface. So the direction of frictional force is opposes the relative motion or the tendency of relative motion between the two surfaces. So always this frictional force parallel to the surface. The frictional forces are not conservative. The work done on a body by a frictional force depends on the total length of the path it travels. So that it is frictional forces are not conservative forces. So does coefficient of friction depend on the area, material or speed? Whenever two surfaces are in contact such that one surface is moving on the other surface, the force developed between the two surfaces is the frictional force. An example of a frictional force is the car moving on the road. The frictional force develops between the car wheel and the road. These are the two examples of a frictional force. So that the frictional force depends upon the area, material, and the speed. So why is rolling friction less than sliding friction? In previous question I have seen sliding friction is less than the static friction. Now the rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. When an object moves on a rough surface or against another object, some opposing force acts on it, known as the force of friction or just friction. The force of friction always acts in the opposite direction to the direction of motion of the object. So why does air friction affects a car's gas mileage? So what is the effect of the friction in cars gas mileage? When people go around or look on the internet shopping for a car, so one of the important aspects is the gas mileage, how much it gives. How much distance would you get out the car for a gallon of gas? Generally, cars with high gas mileage are very marketable to people on a budget. An example of a car with a high gas mileage is Toyota Yaris, which can give has a high 40 miles per gallon. So that define the term static friction. So static friction is nothing but the frictional force between two stationary surfaces is called static friction. So already have discussed about the static friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction. The frictional force between these two stationary surfaces are called static friction. So that's why the sliding friction is less than the static friction, and rolling friction is less than the static friction. So the highest value having the static friction when compared to the rolling and sliding. Rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. Sliding friction is less than the static friction. So these are the relation between these three. So these are the references I have taken for this definition and terminology. Thank you.
Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.